happy to introduce Mary. Shift it here. So Mary Wallis was a clinical nurse specialist in palliative care for many years with Alberta Health Services. She is taught at the U of C Faculty of Nursing and at the Cummings School of Medicine, and continues her involvement with the Canadian Association of Health Humanities. She holds a Ph.D. in English literature, and her thesis was a study of Anglo-Saxon wisdom poetry, a little known but beautiful topic. In addition to decades-long practice of Buddhist meditation, Mary's work in palliative care and her research into wisdom traditions and pilgrimage have given her insight into the varied ways, excuse me, that human beings engage with both life and death. She has been a frequent public speaker on many matters related to end-of-life care, contemplative care of the dying, and self-care for health professionals. So we welcome Mary tonight because tonight she shares mindfulness when things are busy, simple ways to stay grounded. We can expect Mary to begin with a bit of a meditation tonight, and then she will share a brief review of 3 principles of meditation, and then explore the notion of taking refuge. She offers practical ways of finding rest in the moment when everyday life gets busy and demanding. So welcome, Mary.
Thank you, Christine. I have to excuse myself for just a second because I would like to use the little bells for our meditation. Christine, could you, while you're at it, could you also just top this up for me? Thank you very much. I'm just afraid I'm going to need to have a drink while I'm speaking. Thank you for coming, everyone. Good evening. I'm not going to be speaking at all about death tonight, but I got kind of bored with it towards the end of my career in palliative care. I wanted to do something a little more lively. So you get bored with dying. That's what happened to me, but so I don't do so much of that anymore. Thank you very much, Christine. Yes. I would like to start with another meditation. Yours was so exquisite. I'd like to just follow on a little bit from how Christine prepared you with meditation. We're going to be practicing a couple times through the evening tonight. And so this short one now is just to get the lay of the land. We're not going to be heroic about our meditation. We're not trying to achieve anything. We're just settling in and maybe just exploring what it feels like to just sit for a while. So only about 3 or 4 minutes. And if it's comfortable for you, please feel free to close your eyes, but you don't have to. This should be a very non-threatening and pleasant experience. Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I'd like to ask you to become aware of what it feels like to sit in your chair and to just feel the weight of your bottom and the backs of your legs being supported by the chair. Just that felt sense of the body sitting. And when it feels right to move your attention, just take your attention a little further up into the small of your back and feel your back on the back of the chair. As you become aware of the physical experience of sitting in the chair, you may recognize that there's a bit of tension or discomfort. So make the adjustments that you need to so that you feel a little more at peace, a little more comfortable in the chair. And notice that there are 2 shoulder blades in your back as you move further up. Become aware of how they're sitting. There's no way to do this wrong. Just notice what is there. And your attention can now move into the neck and the shoulders. Again, just checking in. How does it feel to have shoulders? And move your attention into your throat, the front of your chest. Upwards into the face, the jaw, the teeth, the inside of your mouth, your nose, cheeks, orbits of your eyes, eyebrows, forehead. It's all there, just waiting to be noticed. Top of the head, the back of the head, the ears. So you've become aware that there is a body. There is a body. And you may have noticed that within that physical structure, the body, breathing is taking place. You may have noticed that your abdomen moves with the breath. Very simple. And see if you can just connect with that in and out movement of the abdomen or the chest. Notice that the body breathes by itself. Breathing in, I know that I am breathing in. Breathing out, I know that I am breathing out. In, out. And after you have breathed out, don't try to breathe in. Just allow the body to breathe itself. There is no strong effort. We're just opening to what is there in the body. The in-breath feels like this. The out-breath feels like this. The pause between the breaths feels like this. You may become aware of sounds in the room, allowing the senses just to sense. Hearing feels like this. You may be aware of other bodily sensations, warmth or pressure, tightness maybe. Within the framework of the body sitting, we just note these sensations. You may notice thoughts arising in the mind, perhaps distracting. And when you do, just don't push them away. Don't get engaged, just let them be. And return to the sensation of there is a body, and within the body there is breathing. Now return to the awareness of sound in the room. Allow the ears to hear. And become aware of not only your body, but the people who are around you. The presence of everyone else in the room. And the feel of the room being all together here in community. And when it feels appropriate for you, just simply take a deeper breath, open the eyes. Come back to the room and the people around you. Before we move on, I'd like to know if any of you had any concerns or questions about that experience. I imagine for most of you, it was not totally unfamiliar. How many of you are more or less regular meditators? Is anybody new to meditation completely tonight? This is, no? Okay. That's important. Thank you for the nice introduction, by the way. This is a talk about how to stay mindful through busy days, or how to use opportunities that life presents us to enhance our awareness of the reality around us without getting freaked out by it. Sharon Salzberg, many of you have probably heard of Sharon. She's one of the founders of Insight Meditation Society in Boston, or near Boston in Massachusetts. And I heard her interviewed not long ago, and she was asked, so Sharon, how many minutes or hours do you meditate every day? She has been a meditator since the 70s. She is a renowned meditation teacher. I thought she was going to say like 2 hours, 3 hours. She said, well, if I have time, about 20 minutes in the morning, and it's about all I can manage in a day. That's not very long, Sharon. But then she went on to say, but through the day, I meditate a lot. I practice mindfulness. So we all are much like Sharon, I think. We don't all have endless hours to sit in meditation at home, but life presents us with many chances to do a little practice and restore ourselves at the same time. So how do we do that through the day? What conditions make it possible for us to drop into mindfulness and awareness? Before we get on to that, I'd like to talk about 3 more foundational ideas about mindfulness. 1, mindfulness; 2, concentration; 3, insight. None of this is probably all that new for you. but hopefully it's a useful review in terms of what we'll be talking about after. And maybe it'll give you some new ways of looking at what you already know. So I'm not reinventing the wheel too much for you, but hope it's helpful. I must say that I've been reading a lot of Joseph Goldstein. He's been a teacher of mine, not personally. I've met him a couple times, but I haven't even been to any of his workshops or retreats, but I've read a lot of his books and I've watched a lot online, and I am very grateful for everything he's done. I've learned a tremendous amount from him. So quite a bit of this talk tonight, at least the early parts, is informed by what I've learned from Joseph. He has a particular slant on mindfulness. He's pretty well known. He's pretty well regarded. Not everybody is crazy about him, but I have found that he's quite useful to as a beginning point for my own practice. So mindfulness first can be described as simply settling into the present moment. We hear this term thrown around a lot, be present. Joseph gave a talk not long ago and he said, you know, that's great. We should all be present. But if you look at dogs, every dog, I walked my dog this afternoon and every dog in the dog park was present. They were just so involved with playing and with sniffing and checking their pee nail and, you know, doing everything. And they were all totally present. So I have to think that there's more to being present than, or more to mindfulness than simply being present. If that's all being present is, we'd all be running around having a wonderful time at the dog park, but we wouldn't be human beings. So as Joseph points out, being present also involves knowing you are present. There is an observer. And that is the other piece of the equation in mindfulness. There's presence and there is an awareness. There is an observer that is seeing the present moment. There is an observing power of the mind. So from this point, when we discover that, we can start investigating what is going on in the present and paying attention. And there's a further dimension to this, and that is that observer of the present moment is observing through a particular lens. It may be the lens of wanting, or it may be the lens of aversion, or it just may be the lens of projecting and drifting and being a little disconnected, the lens of delusion. And the question is that lens that I'm using creating more suffering for myself or for other people? A very good example of this is what Joseph calls catalog mind. Everyone has opened a catalog, right? Or opened it online, and you go through and you're flipping through the pages, and you're present, you're very involved in that catalog, and there is an observing mind, but that observing mind is looking through the lens of wanting. And as Joseph very aptly put it, I think we can all agree with this, we're turning the pages looking for something to want. Right? Oh, I don't see anything I want there. No, turn the page. No, anything. Oh, I want that. So the lens is clouded by desire. It's an interesting way of looking at it, that, yeah, there's an observing mind, very powerful, but that observing mind needs to be observed as well. So being present and mindful is much more complex than we would initially think. That's mindfulness. A few thoughts on that. There are two commonly recognized paths in the meditative process, in mindfulness meditation. The first one is concentration, what's known in Buddhist circles as samadhi. That's the Pali word for it. And the other one is insight or wisdom, or sometimes called vipassana meditation. So I think we need to just separate those two out because they're both useful during the day. We just need to know which one to use. So it's important to be able to distinguish what are the features of concentrative meditation and what are the features of insight meditation. So let's talk about concentration first. This is pretty important. Out of the mass of thoughts and physical sensations and emotions and stories and hopes and memories in our mind. You notice that when we were meditating, right? There's a lot in there. It's going around quite a bit. We have to select one thing for concentration and make a determination to keep the mind focused on that. So we recognize that there's a lot happening, but I'm going to choose I'm going to use the observing power of my mind, mindfulness, to focus on one thing. The most convenient thing is typically the breath, isn't it? But there are meditation objects, there are a dime a dozen. Some people use a mantra, some people use an image, some people use religious iconography for meditation. It doesn't really matter. There's nothing particularly sacred about the breath, except it's just so handy, and it's cheap, it's free, and it's always there. And it also has that connection with the physical body that makes it a very useful resource for settling an anxious or a tense body. So it's got that mind-body connection that sometimes visual images don't always have, because it is right embedded in the physical body. So for those of you who may be skeptical about meditation in general, at the very least, a concentrative exercise trains your mind so you can focus better, you can remember things better, you can concentrate better, you can read a book from beginning to end and get it better. You're just more connected with reality. And all of this whole process, mindfulness, concentration, insight, has to do with connecting ourselves undilutedly with the real world around us and within us. This kind of concentration exercise also can improve your physical well-being. The example is my mother, who never meditated a second in her 100 years and never would. But I watched her concentrating when she used her walker. I will not fall. And honestly, that was her meditation, whether she called it that or not. She'd had one fall. But she was never going to do it again. And every step she took was a mindful step, whether she knew it or not. And she did not fall again. Even when she was 100, she never went over. Because I could see her just zeroing in on step by step by step. That's all it is. That's concentration. So you don't need to call it anything particularly esoteric. Good quality concentration works no matter what context you're applying it in. I would also say that concentration has an interesting evolutionary feature to it. And there are people who study, why do we meditate at all? What is the purpose? What is it about human beings that they find that this is a useful thing to do? And they trace it back to Paleolithic times and previous, when if you weren't connected 100% with the target of your arrow or your harpoon or whatever it was, and you missed, you starved. So this practice of being very directly connected with the object of your attention was literally a question of survival. And there is some thinking among evolutionary biologists that that's where this comes from. That it's that innate in us that at one time it was a matter of survival. And so there were practices to make sure that you were focused on the things that needed to be done without any equivocating or distraction. So speaking about the breath and the task at hand in concentration, one of the things that's very common is, I fell off. Geez, I wish I could stay on the breath for 10 times. I only made it to 2 this time. And, geez, I just can't keep, we punish ourselves a lot. There's a lot of self-talk and a lot of self-judgment about how hard it is for us to meditate. And people will say, my mind's a gong show. I can't focus. That is not the point. The point is when you wake up from your distraction, and you all did, right? In this meditation we just did, your heads went off. I know they did. And then you woke up and you came back to your breath, didn't you? Right? Me too. And when you were doing it with us, when you said about your heart, being aware of your heart beating, well, what do you expect? I'm sitting up here in front of you. Of course, my heart's going to be a little bit, the rate's going to be elevated. So I became quite aware of that. But you go off and then you you wake and, oh, I went off into distraction. That's the moment. This is one of the most important things that Joseph Goldstein taught me. And I don't know why it's not talked about more. It's when you wake up, pay attention to that split second. What does it feel like to wake up? And what then does it feel like to move the attention over back to the breath? Those two moments are critical. It doesn't matter how many times you go off. If you go off 1,000 times, you have 1,000 opportunities to observe the wake up moment when the mind is, oh, I'm alert. That's what alertness feels like. I've come to, I'm on. May just be a nanosecond, but you felt it. So pay attention to that moment, because we often forget about it because we're thinking, oh, geez, there, I went off again. We're beating out, there's a lot of self-talk about it, instead of just paying attention to what does it feel like to wake up? It's terrific. And then also, when you say, okay, I'm going back to the breath, you can watch the movement of the mind. You can feel that power that you've got to go back to the breath. This is a practice of power, concentration, building strength in the mind. And that's where it happens, in that moment of awareness. So the going off into distraction is not an issue. As Sharon Salzberg says, don't worry about it. Just let it go, because that's not the important part. It's noticing when you come back. And if you do that enough times, you'll get the feel of, oh, the alert mind. Yeah, that's what it feels like. And you can recognize it and cultivate it. Now, there's one other dimension to the concentrated mind. And in all the Buddhist teachings, they will say the prerequisite for solid concentration, surprisingly, is contentment, happiness. Did you feel when you were breathing how pleasant it is to breathe? That's a little taste of this feeling of contentment. I don't need to be anywhere else. There's nothing I need. There's nothing I want. There's nothing I'm hating in this moment. I am content. And it just feels like the breath is coming in and out. You may have had a couple of moments of that. That's contentment. And without contentment, why that lens is being shaped by, I wish I was here. I've got to do my shopping list. There's so many little pieces of, I won't call them suffering. That's a bit melodramatic a term, but little things that niggle away at you. You're not content. And so it's so important in these concentration exercise to cultivate this feeling of letting go of things you want and don't want, and just connecting with the contentment of being simple with the breath. So it's a very strong feature of good, strong meditation. Now, we all know that we're trying to develop the capacity for better concentration. So that's a desire, isn't it? This is the great paradox of meditation, isn't it? I want this thing that but I can't, I'm not supposed to want things, but I really want to be a good meditator. And you get caught up in that. So this has been recognized. They thought of that, all the mystics of the past, and everyone's that there are ways of working with that. And one of them simply, Sid, you and I were having a conversation earlier about the cloud of unknowing. I'm pretty sure this is from there. This is from a Christian text, a meditation guide for monks in the Middle Ages called The Cloud of Unknowing. Beautiful book. And he instructs the monks who are perplexed by this. Well, how do I want to be a good meditator and not be full of desire at the same time? How do I master that paradox? And he said, you don't worry about it, just hide your desire, just tuck it away. Just don't think about it. Just go ahead with your practice. You can't force it. You can't resolve the problem. So he says, just hide your desire away for a while you're meditating. So that's one way of getting around this strenuousness that we often feel. I've got to get this right. It's just hide that. You can't force it away, because you really do want to master something with this practice, because it's good for us. It's good for the world. But if we get caught up in the ego of wanting it to be really good, then we're lost. So just hide that little part away. So there are some real challenges to concentration. We'll talk about a few of them. There is a great story that one of the abbots in a monastery in England talks about, where he was having to meditate in a monastery in, I'm wanting to say Thailand. And it was going very well until there was an 11-day festival in the town where they were meditating. And they showed movies, Bollywood movies, over and nonstop, 11 days, night and day. And he just, it was so difficult for him. And he had no option but to just continue. And he said, by about day 10, I was starting to just let it be. But he said, I fought it so hard for all this time because it was just blaring music. There was another tale about a monk who announced when he got to his monastery that the biggest challenge for him was traffic noise. So the abbot put him in a room which was right over the highway. And that's where his task was to learn to concentrate with traffic noise. I thought that was a little merciless, to tell you the truth, but it was, but this is, what we're shooting for is to be able to maintain that connection with the self, no matter what is swirling around us. So it's pretty, it can be pretty challenging. And Ajahn Chah tells another story about sitting, there's a festival, the villages are in an uproar, and he's frustrated trying to do his meditation. He's the abbot and he's frustrated. And finally he said, okay, I just have to realize that they're having fun down there. I'm having fun up here. The sound is just sound. That's all it is. It's just sound. Allow the sound, the senses to sense. Just allow the sound to be. I won't bother the sound. The sound doesn't need to bother me. It's just sound. So that was how Ajahn Chah approached the problem of distraction while he was trying to concentrate. The other way, just one last point on concentration. The other way to help ourselves focus is what I was suggesting to you during the meditation, which is to return to the body. Sometimes it's not the breath, just coming back. There is a body, just the anchor in a physical self. This is very helpful, and you can use these little phrases. You don't have to be silent in your mind. Sometimes there are helpful phrases that you can use in meditation that just bring you back. And one of them is, with me, it's quite helpful. There is a body, or there is breathing, or if you want to get a little more fine-tuned about it, what is my experience of the body in this moment? What is my experience of breathing? Or the breathing is like this. Some phrase that you will discover for yourself that will just help you come back to that focus of concentration and relieve your brain of having to cope with all the swirl around you, all the noise. I want to check the time here. I don't want to go too far there. I wasn't sure how long all this would take, so I'm speaking again in the spring. So I may just continue on because we do need to stop at about 8 or maybe a short while after so we can have questions. So I don't want to feel pressured with this, and I'd like to be able to have a conversation with you about it. So just be respectful of the time. So let's move to insight. Now, we've talked about mindfulness in general terms. We've talked about the practice of concentration. The other aspect of mindfulness work is insight. And if concentration is the practice of power of the observing mind, insight meditation is the practice of freedom. It's the practice of liberating yourself from those habits of thought and feeling that bring about discomfort or suffering in yourself or in other people. It's finding those, examining them, investigating, letting them go, letting them fade away, and feeling that sense of, okay, I've moved on. I'm not a slave to this way of thinking. It's a long and subtle process. It takes decades, but it's well worth exploring. So from a place of concentration, we always start with an insight meditation. With a little concentration, we focus on the breath. Inevitably, as you noticed in your meditation, thoughts, emotions, feelings come up, right? Memories, stories, physical sensations. And instead of returning to the breath, why we admit one of those that seems to be particularly dominant into our awareness. So we say, okay, something happened to me today at the store, standing in line. And that lady in front of me, she had so many coupons. And it was just driving me nuts because she was nitpicking about which coupon to use. It drove me crazy. So you hear, oh, there's a story. Paying attention to the story. What is my experience of that story? That's the question you ask. Because what you don't want to do is get back involved in the story, right? You want to just say, oh, a story has come to mind. And then, what is my experience of the story? Irritation. And then, can I just, instead of concentrating or moving back onto the breath, can I stay with what is the experience of irritation? How does this feel? What does irritation feel like? It's very rare that people do this. They just get caught up in that emotion, and that's the truth. But it's a feature of the mind, and we know this because there is a phenomenon and there's the observing power of the mind. And we can separate those two so that the observing power of the mind looks at the phenomenon. And the phenomenon in this case is a memory of irritation. And she's still bugging me. She's in my head and so what does that feel like? And we often discover when we do this that irritation is actually wispier, fainter, vaguer than we thought. It's not this big thing. When we look at it directly, it's merely a thought. It's merely a little feature of the mind. It's not you. It's just something that's come in that we've given a lot of importance to. So looking at it will diffuse it and take it back into proportion so that it's not this global thing in my mind. That lady drove me nuts. No, I had an experience in the store. A feeling of irritation arose in me because of that. It's a much different way of looking at it. Because when we say, oh, she made me so mad, that's all about me. I'm identifying with my anger, my irritation. But if you switch the language and say, a feeling of irritation has arisen, then there's an observer and an arisen feeling. There's a wedge driven between the observing mind that has power and a phenomenon of the mind. Follow? Makes sense? So that is the practice of insight in a nutshell. There are many, many aspects of it, of course, but that, I think in its bare configuration, is that investigating what comes up in the mind and observing it. Now, irritation's not that great, is it? It doesn't make me feel good. Who knows, but maybe that person took it out on the lady with the coupons. Wasn't very good for her. It's not a very nice feeling to have. So maybe that's something that is unnecessary in my being. Is there some way that I can just let that go and not let it pull me in? I don't need to cultivate that. If it happens again, I'm going to remember this. I'm not going to get caught up in that irritation. It may show up again, but I know now I can just let that go. I don't need to be part of it. So here's the flip side of this. I'm focusing on something that's negative, but I told my story about Mila Mulroney the last time.
That's funny. I was thinking you should tell them.
Yeah, well, it's a positive thing. You know Mila Mulroney, Brian Mulroney's wife, and you know Brian died. Who was here when I told this story before? Okay, bear with me. Yeah. In the 80s, I lived in when Brian was prime minister. This is not a political story. I happened to live down the street on the unfashionable end from 24 Sussex, which was the home of the prime minister. And I happened to know somebody who was in the press corps, in the press gallery in Parliament, just a chance acquaintance. And every year there is a garden party for the press corps at 24 Sussex, very la-di-da. And this friend of ours couldn't find anybody to go with and asked me, would I like to go with him to the garden party? Well, of course, I said yes. How not? And off we went. I got all dressed up and walked over and met everybody there. Brian was there, shook his hand. But what really impressed me was Mila. She was great. She was the most gracious individual, very warm, very personable. I really liked her. It was just this feeling of there's a person I admire and I like. And she was very well turned out. And the place was beautiful. It was a lovely garden party with sandwiches and little cakes and things. And we chatted very briefly. She wouldn't know me from anything now. I mean, it was a fleeting encounter. But for me, it was special because I was quite delighted with her. So fast forward to last spring, Brian Mulroney died. And when I heard this, my first thought was, oh, poor Mila. They had a remarkably good marriage, a beautiful relationship. And my heart went out to her. I just thought, oh, she must be so sad. And so, I can just imagine the sense of loss she must have. And I had the presence of mind in that moment to recognize that this was the arising of compassion in me. It wasn't, I'm not necessarily any more compassionate than anybody else, but this was something that arose in me in this moment. And it was something that with insight, I just looked at it and thought, what does it feel like to feel compassion? And it was a good feeling in one sense. And the conditions where I had a warm heart towards this person. So it was pretty easy to feel compassion, but at least I got a look at what compassion felt like. And that's an example of something that arises in the mind that would be good to cultivate, to create conditions where that might come a little more. I mean, it doesn't mean that I am compassionate. It means that there is the possibility of compassion in me, and I can work with that. I can allow that to happen. So don't always think about insight as looking at the dark stuff. In fact, it is not that. It is looking at everything and then choosing what do I want to cultivate that is wholesome and skillful and helpful to myself and other people. So even if it's a small thing, it's so easy, like Mila, it was a simple thing to feel compassion, but it gave me a glimpse of what it felt like. So who cares how easy it was? It was there. So this is how we learn from our awareness. The observing power of the mind will teach us things about how to be in the world. So there is a pretty strong ethical dimension to this, because this is how we shape our relationships with ourselves and with other people and with reality. So, people sometimes say, oh, meditation, you just go inward and it's just navel gazing and you just look. No, it's even in concentration where you're just looking at your own breath. This is a relationship with reality. That's what you're cultivating, the power to look at things as they are. It just happens to be your breath. So one more comment. Those are the three features. I hope I've sort of elaborated them enough to give you a framework for how we then apply mindfulness in everyday life. The notion of having a refuge is very helpful for me. And that is having a place to go in the mind when things are challenging or difficult, or just even very busy, not necessarily bad, just busy. Where do I take my power from? Where do I go for peacefulness in a world that is very, very busy all around me? And the origin of the word contemplate, and this is what we're talking about, is a contemplative practice. The origin of the word contemplate is temple. There's con and there's late on the other end of it. But the word is from the old Greek word for temple. And a temple was a space. It was a place where originally it was sacred. It was a sacred place where you would examine the entrails of animals for clues for prophecy, for understanding the future, for understanding the cosmos. So we don't look at contemplation like that now. However, we are looking closely at something to understand the universe in a sacred place. And that's where contemplation, what it basically means is we find a space for ourselves where we can observe and attempt to understand. So understanding that when you're in a swirl, where is my place of contemplation and observation? It's a useful question to ask yourself when things are wild and crazy, is where can I go in my mind that I can observe from a place of peace and inquiry and curiosity and interest? It is also helpful to have a little bit of practice every day, even if it's just 3 or 4 minutes of a concentration practice. Let's not get grandiose about I'm going to do an hour a day of meditation from now on. I don't want to inspire you to such rash promises, but it is helpful if you have a chance, even if it's every few days. Take some time if you have it to just practice a simple meditation like we did tonight. Christine, the way she did it with us, or the way I did it, or your own, whatever. It just helps to have that sort of basic practice going. So in everyday life, it is important to know when mindfulness is present and when it's not. Mindfulness is like everything else. It comes and it goes. So let's not get too upset with ourselves if we realize at the end of a day, I wasn't mindful for one split second today. You noticed it. It took a while, but you noticed finally that there was no mindfulness present in this day. That is not a criminal offense. Noticing it is the important part. So there may be times in the day where, oh, I can feel that I am aware enough of what is happening to get a skillful job done and to be kind to myself and others. There may be 6 hours in there where you're just swept up, and then you notice, oh, there was no mindfulness there. Maybe I can just attempt a little bit here. So there's no self-punishment, no self-judgment about this at all. Mindfulness is like everything else. It comes and goes. It's just how it is. Everybody will tell you that, even the most experienced people. Joseph Goldstein talks about, and this only happened to him about, I would think maybe 6 or 7 years ago when he was 70, 3 or 4, and he was meditating on a personal retreat. And but he was also doing some teaching, and he found himself in the midst of his meditation thinking, I really like the feel of this sweatshirt. It's so comfortable. I'm going to buy more of these sweatshirts to always meditate with this brand of sweatshirt, but I'm going to have to get different colors of sweatshirts. Otherwise, everybody's going to think this is the only sweatshirt I've got. And he said, and here's Joseph, who's meditated for, well, he's 80 now, so 60 years. So I took heart from this, that even the best of meditators wander off into episodes of non-mindfulness and non-awareness. It's okay. It happens. He was really laughing at himself about that. It was quite a funny story. So the next, finding a place of refuge, knowing when you're mindful and when it's not present. The third is, what type of situation requires what type of, or calls for what kind of meditation? Do I practice a concentrative method here, or do I go for insight? So, sitting on the bus, waiting at the dentist's office. You can think of any downtimes in your life. Is that an opportunity for a little concentration practice? Just a little dab. The dentist thing will get you because you'll be wondering what's in store, but it is maybe a helpful practice to just come down into the breath and practice a little concentration. How easy. There are lots of downtimes in our everyday lives. One of the Julian of Norwich, one of the Christian mystics in England from when was she? 14th century, I think, said, maybe 13th. When you're in the bathroom, sitting there, be mindful, she says. There are no exceptions to when you can be mindful. So if that's all you've got, you could practice a little concentration in the cubicle for a few moments. It's that physical. It's that gritty. Standing in line at the grocery store, awareness of standing. What does it feel like to stand? It's actually a great gift to be able to stand, isn't it? Or what's it like to stand and have a sore hip? worth investigating. Pain is present. What does that feel like? Washing the dishes. Thich Nhat Hanh talks a lot in The Miracle of Mindfulness about using dishwashing as a concentrative exercise, focusing on the feel of the dish, the feel of the soap, the feel of the cloth in your hands, the sound of the running water. Is tuning into something so simple. But this is where the rubber hits the road. It's in these simple things in everyday life. We talk in rather sophisticated terms about mindfulness and concentration and all the different ways that you can do it. But when it comes right down to the practice, it's simple stuff. It's every day. Walking in nature. One thing I've discovered about walking in nature is that sometimes I try too hard to love it. And maybe I should just let a tree be a tree and just see a tree or see a mountain or see a river, and the loving it will come. But sometimes I realize I've been so excited to be out there that I kind of missed it because I was all caught up in the excitement and this is so great, this is so great, caught up in desire, really. Could I just not let that mountain be a mountain and look at it? And I actually found in practicing that I see more and I appreciate more, and I just kind of relax in myself about it. Okay, I'm going to end with a poem. I have more, but I'm going to end here. And then I'd love to hear back from you, any comments or things you'd like to remark on. This is a poem, though, that I heard about from Joseph. It's by Fernando Pessoa, who's a Portuguese poet. And I think he died in the 40s or 50s, 1940s or 50s. And it's called Live, You Say, in the Present. And this is the translation from the Portuguese. So some of this might resonate with you. I'll go slow. Live, you say, in the present. Live only in the present. But I do not want the present. I want the reality. I want the things that exist, not the time that measures them. What is the present? It is a thing about the past and the future. It is something that exists because other things exist. I just want reality, things without a present. I do not want to include time in my schema. I do not want to think of things as gifts. I want to think of them as things. I do not want to separate them from themselves, treating them as gifts. I should not even treat them as real. I should not treat them as anything. I should just see them, just watch them, to see them until I cannot think of them. See them without time or space. Seeing can dispense with anything but what you see. This is the seeing science, but she is no science. Interesting poem, isn't it? I do not want the present. I want reality. What is the present? It's just a concept, something between the past and the future. And so when we're in our lives, we're wanting to see what is true out there, what is real. And we see all the clouds in our mind, in that cloud, that observing power of the mind, all the stories we tell ourselves, all the assumptions we make, we're not really seeing. I really like this poem. The more I read it, the more I like it. You want to hear it again? Okay. Both? Can you stand it? Those of you who are not poetically minded? Sorry. English literature. I can't help it. All right. Live, you say, in the present. Live only in the present. But I do not want the present. I want the reality. I want the things that exist, not the time that measures them. What is the present? It is a thing about the past and the future. It is something that exists because other things exist. I just want reality, things without a present. I do not want to include time in my schema. I do not want to think of things as gifts. I want to think of them as things. I do not want to separate them from themselves, treating them as gifts. I should not even treat them as real. I should not even treat them as anything. I should just see them, just watch them, to see them until I cannot think of them, see them without time or space. Seeing can dispense with anything but what you see. This is the seeing science, but she is no science. That last line, but she is no science, is similar to, I cannot think of it. It's the thinking mind. It's not about the thinking mind. It's about the seeing clearly. That's the distinction he's making in that last line. It's a bit confusing. All right. We'll leave it at that from me. Is there anything you'd like to ask, comment about, complain about? Any stories you'd like to tell? Experiences that you've had with this kind of approach to mindfulness in everyday life?
If I need the words, or I just put away in the nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I find that I'm safe books. I'm loved. I say that I'm loved. I like your words of it. How does my body feel?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's very neutral too.
Yeah. It takes us into the body, and that's really where it all starts, is in the body. I don't know, do I need to repeat the question for the listeners? Yeah. So the comment was how useful it is to use some language to help provide a sense of safety and content kind of to the meditation process. But you also appreciated the notion of how does the body feel sitting in a chair, or the fact that there is a body. How does it feel to breathe? What does it feel like? There's a phrase from Frank Ostaseski, the breathing feels like this. I find this a very useful phrase, or the pause. If I'm struggling to really connect with something, my body knows perfectly well how it feels. It's just my head is messing it up. So if I can just tune into, all right, it feels like this physically, then I'm connected. Because your body is connected already. It's just up here that it's not so much. So sometimes you need the language to enter back into the sensation of the body. And it is a place of safety. Yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you very much, Maria, for such a insightful operating.
You're welcome.
What I understand is actually with your recitation of poem with intonations, it actually heralds me as an exponent of meditation, that there is a thing between reality and a scene, and that's the cause.
Yeah, yeah.
There is
Yeah.
a cause actually.
Yeah,
Right?
right.
So what I understand that if I practice any kind of, whether it's based on concentration or in study form, what I learned right now, that there is a cause actually which is punctuated between these two extremes.
Yeah,
Right? Because sometimes our realities are fleeting and variables,
mhm. Yeah,
whereas sometimes we tilt it towards more seeing is reading.
mhm. Yeah,
It's more kind testing.
mhm.
But I really like it. I still remember that when I was young, I was trying my level best to make a poem. So I made assembly, I still remember that, with my sweetheart's lips, like lush ice creams, which was my fleeting
Yeah.
reality.
Yeah. The comment, it just for the recording, was about the importance of recognizing the pause, right, between perception and thought. That's also known as the gap. The gap. And the longer we can stay in that gap, the better, because it gives us room to collect ourselves and to find an appropriate response to what we've observed. Because otherwise, if there's no gap, you identify with what you see immediately. As you say, seeing becomes believing immediately. And it may not be true. Or it may be a belief that you hold that's more about you than what you're seeing. Right? And so to just find that gap in the practice is really crucial. Thank you for bringing that up. That's helpful. I would love to read your whole poem.
For sure.
When you were, yeah, how old were you when you wrote that? 17?
Maybe, well, 1.5 years lesser.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit more, Mary, around the cultivation of like an attitude in our practice.
Yeah.
Like a response, like when you were talking about that sense of compassion that arose in you and the
Yeah.
awareness around it, to know it and feel it and be in that observer mind. I was recently speaking with someone who felt very untethered and not grounded.
Why don't you move over here on the camera? And then, because now it's a conversation.
Who felt very untethered and ungrounded, and throughout the conversation, it became this list of all these unknowns that she was facing in her life and the discomfort around that and that feeling of being untethered and not grounded. And so we went, through the unknowns and how it was feeling for her.
Yeah.
And then I invited her to maybe think of some knowns, that versus just unknowns. And the response was, I can't think of any right now from this state of where I am. And so I think that can be quite common, when we're in that state of stress or we don't feel grounded, so then I suggested, well, could you find one thing one known that you can rely on and trust?
Yeah.
And she came to that. And of course, it was like love of her family. And so then I guided her into a meditation. Like, can we go somewhere safe where you know and where you want to be? And can you see your family around you? And can you feel their love? Can you take in and feel that? And then actually feel it in your body, feel what it's like to have that known love. Right? And so talking more about how do we cultivate, those feelings of what's positive, just one moment that's true for us that we can rely on, that we can return to.
There, the refuge, the place of refuge. Yeah.
So as you shared that, I thought that it's just recently, I literally had that conversation yesterday.
Yeah. So
it's very common for us, like, we're all feeling, we open the news, there's so much uncertainty and what that can trigger and, our day-to-day lives. So just finding those moments for yourselves, the knowns.
Yeah, and then beginning to practice those knowns, like love. She has it for her family. I know nothing about her situation, obviously, but just extrapolating from that, there's love for her family. So to cultivate that, how does one do that? Well, if I can feel it, if I have that kind of compassion for Mila or love for her family, I wonder if I could try to allow that feeling to arise for somebody neutral, like the cashier at the grocery store. Can I cultivate that a little bit? Just see if I can feel that feeling for that person. Just continue to expand that known ability to love family. Well, if I can do that with family, I wonder if I can do it for even this person who's not so I'm not so favorable about. Maybe I can work with that a little bit and explore what it is about that person that puts me off, that maybe I can replace that with some love for something else in there that I see in that person. So you work with those positive places and positive feelings. You're not trying to make stuff up. It isn't an affirmation. You're not gonna, I love you, even though you can't stand. It's not that. It's recognizing the reality of how you feel, but allowing for something else to arise. Like maybe it's possible that this person isn't exactly how I see them. Maybe that will allow that feeling, because I know I have the capacity for love. Can I make it possible for myself to care for this person? Do I need to see this person differently? There's so many ways to do it. I don't want to over elaborate it, but you can see how cultivating skillful or wholesome states of mind is a pretty good thing to do.
Yeah, there's beautiful practices for loving kindness, like metta. that we can search up that are so wonderful, and that very practice of offering it to someone we care about greatly, and we know that that love is returned, is actually a really powerful practice too. You can vision them in your mind offering those wishes of loving kindness and care and compassion, and then visualize them turning it back to you, which is so powerful, to be able to hear them send those same wishes back to you. Oh, it's lovely. It's a really lovely practice to let it come back.
It is lovely, and almost universally, isn't this true, Christine? People find meditation one of the most difficult things to do. It's finding the capacity in ourselves to love other people. That is really tough. I'm great on the cushion with concentration, and I can try and get equanimity going and all those other virtues, but metta, many people will say this, metta is just, boy, it's really tough. It is, and I don't know what's so challenging about it, but everybody finds meditation really difficult. And I remember somebody recently saying, I was at a metta or loving kindness meditation retreat. It lasted 10 days. Oh my God, I nearly, and everybody listening to this story said, oh, how did you survive? But invariably, people will say, by the end of the 9th day, I was starting to have feelings of loving kindness that were genuine. So it does work, but it's a hard nut to crack, that kind of innate hostility that we often harbor for people, or suspicion or fear. I don't know what it is that makes us aversive to other people, because we're often, as human beings, we're very welcoming, right? We have very kind aspects to our being. But that dark part, and it's very predominant right now in our culture, isn't it? There's a lot of anger towards other people, and so it's really hard to work with metta in that kind of an environment, I think, because you just get caught up in it. So,
well, I will share with you my personal experiential learning. When I struggle to decipher that, is it difficult, or it is just a part and parcel of the nature of meditation? So I come across that if I'm able to understand between my random acts and the spontaneous act, if I go to Tim's, most of the time I'm living with the wisdom of insecurity of just grabbing the cup and not interacting.
Oh,
If
yeah.
at all I'm interacting, that's kind of my random act. But whenever I am with a familiar individuals, I do practice the kind of being spontaneous.
yeah,
And I'm more kind of a practitioner in that.
yeah,
Right. So what I understand, I drop off my being random. I'm more predictable. This is what I'm practicing.
yeah.
Predictability.
That is a great. I love that. Next time I go to Tim's, I'm going to think about that. Yeah, that when you go to Tim's, you're just kind of on automatic pilot. And you mentioned, the tension and the anxiety about just gonna get my coffee and get out of here. So we forget that this was an opportunity to practice metta. And you can do it because you do it with your family already. So what's so different about the clerk in Tim's? Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, thank you.
Again, your teachings recently, you just shared with us that counts actually. If I'm not able to trace back the beings in the fields, it's very difficult for me to be spontaneous and connected with the better stuff.
Just like me, very useful. So when I have a difficult situation, I just have to go back to just like me.
Just like me. Yeah, yeah,
That's a wonderful
yeah,
practice.
yeah,
Wonderful.
yeah, yeah. And perhaps that person is caught up in a cycle of suffering and unwholesome thoughts, but just like me, right? Yeah, just like me. Yeah. How are we time-wise?
It is 8:23, so.
I want to comment on something that we're meditating and such that I can think of my pay it forward, you know, and that's the person who could still do it, but then that was at the comment, if you see somebody without a smile, then give them one of yours.
Yeah,
How
If-
often we just.
yeah. If you see somebody without a smile, give them one of yours.
That's good.
Oh, It is profound. It's so profound, it gave me goosebumps. Yeah, really. Yeah,
And that would change maybe that person's life
yeah,
or the day.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Have you ever had it happen to you? Where someone smiled at you? Because some of us have been on the receiving end of that too, and we know how wonderful it is. Yeah.
Any other final thoughts? Close out the night or anything that needs to be said?
Mary, I have a question.
Yeah.
Would you like to suggest if this world could turn to become a romantic universe, what would be the outcome of meditation?
Ask me the question again.
So one day you have a power to change this world into a romantic universe.
Is that good? Yeah,
Absolutely.
okay, all right.
I wish I could.
Yeah.
So what would be the place of meditation in that world?
Oh, I see what you're saying. In a perfect world, why would you meditate? What would be the purpose? Oh. Christine, what do you think? It's a wonderful question. It's a wonderful question. Mother Teresa was asked that, if you got all the poverty in the world taken care of, what would happen? And she said, we'd be out of a job. So I don't want to sound trite, but that was what Mother Teresa said. So, yeah, what do you, what a great question.
The first thing that comes to me is in this universe, then I would need to cultivate the presence to be there for it. To actually
go.
appreciate it and be there for it.
But
Maybe we're already there. Yeah, already there.
Be saying. Yes. Yes. What is it that we see? What is it that we see?
Oh, can I read you one of the other poems? You were going to say something. I don't want to.
it's like one of the bedtime story. It's like, I'm just so chill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I brought Mary Oliver with me. Oh dear. And I've marked off 3, but I'm just going to read a short one.
Can we tell who she is?
Oh, she's an American poet. Now, I think when did she die? Yeah.
Yes.
I'm trying to think when though. It's not that long ago. Yeah, yeah. Okay. She won the Pulitzer Prize. She's the consummate poet for our age. She's a a Shelley and a Keats for the 21st century. Look and see. This morning at Waterside, I get emotional reading. This morning at Waterside, a sparrow flew to a water rock and landed by error on the back of an eider duck. Lightly it fluttered off, amused. The duck, too, was not provoked, but you might say was laughing. This afternoon, a gull sailing over our house was casually scratching its stomach of white feathers with one pink foot as it flew. Oh Lord, how shining and festive is your gift to us if we only look and see. It's marvelous. So why I wake early. Why I wake early, Mary Oliver.
Thank you.
Full of,
Thank you.
you are welcome. Thank you. Thanks.